Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well.
Good.
I have a subject today that we've talked about before, and to me it's a little bit discouraging because I think we've and will continue to present things as objectively as we can, and we haven't said Trump is the guy we hate the most, and everything he does is wrong no matter what he does. And we've tried to sort it out. But you know, with his effort yesterday in his second veto, he's discouraged me from any enthusiasm to try to give him a break, especially on this war issue. We know now that the veto he cast yesterday was the second time. The first one was when the Congress wanted to rein in his executive power, the Emergency Powers Declaration. And there may have been some reasonable reasons for having that legislation and having that power, but our support against that, the fact that it wasn't a proper power the president should have to be able to declare an emergency like that. But yesterday it was the effort once again to invoke the 1973 War Powers Resolution Act, which was written mainly to try to curtail the Imperial Presidency that starts war. And of course they were doing this at the end of the Vietnam War. And ever since that time, because at that time it was passed easily in the House and the Senate and vetoed by Nixon. The veto was overridden, and that's how it's on the book. But every president since then has endorsed a negative attitude about that. We don't need that. Of course, if we followed the Constitution, we wouldn't need it. This is an attempt to try to stimulate a new interest in the Constitution about, if you're going to start these wars, we have to have a way of stopping it. And there's been feeble attempts, and I guess some of the things we did when I was in Washington, they were energetic, but they turned out to be feeble in that we never stopped the war. Yeah. But this is what this is all about. There's been resolutions. Paul Ryan put obstacles into it, but finally they get it passed in the House and the Senate. The Yemen war has to cease. And the resolution was passed. It was easily passed, but nothing near close to override a veto. And the president yesterday vetoed this. And it was always, things like this are always done in glowing terms. Make America great, and this is responsibility. It's my constitutional authority, and we're going to save the children in Yemen, that sort of thing. So there was a lot of nonsense, but it's going to be law, so it did not work. So in the process of this little discussion, I will try to make some points on what's left. If they're going to disobey and ignore the Constitution, and you can't get these resolutions passed, and then the president vetoes it, what is left? So we still have a job, not only trying to prevent war, we have a job trying to stop the wars that are going on.
Yeah, exactly. And you've never liked the War Powers Resolution because it basically de facto gives the president a green light to start a war. Once he starts a war, Congress is obviously not going to end it. But I think if you think about that in the context of the Constitution, as you know better than anyone, does give Congress the authority and the power to declare or end a war. And if you just simply look at SJ Resolution 7, which is what they voted on and passed and was vetoed, Congress has spoken. And that's a constitutional voice, I think. I would say it's a constitutional voice by Congress saying end the war. And so I think the president's veto in a way is irrelevant to the point. So the president at this point is almost acting like an outlaw, ignoring the will of Congress. So,
and with my frustration, I was talking about this with you and said that it's not a good law. They're disobeying the Constitution, and this is so discouraging because they won't even make a try for it. So how can we see anything positive about this? And to me, about the only thing positive, because we actually used it because it was there and it was a vehicle for calling attention to these wars that are going on, and too many Americans just totally ignore it. So even with this called attention to it. And today we're talking about why did the president why did the president veto this? And of course, it's very possible that this could be an issue in the election. So there's a political aspect to this. But ultimately, I think what we have to fall back on, since it's not a good piece of legislation, it's defending the Imperial Presidency seems to thrive, is about the only way this is going to stop is the way the Vietnam War stopped, is get enough people energized, get an anti-war movement strong enough to tell the Congress by majority vote, well, the president could veto it, is just stop the funding.
Yeah.
You know, of the war. They're allowed to do that, and but the sentiment has to be strong enough, because probably whether it had been Obama or Trump or the next president, they're going to protect the Imperial Presidency, and that goes back to my old theme. Is our biggest problem in Washington is bipartisanship.
Yeah.
Because for this kind of stuff, they protect the Imperial Presidency.
Yeah, it's difficult to get over this veto problem, but why not put it in the defense authorization bill? Now, that would really up it, wouldn't it? Because the president would have to decide, and he would, of course, win some rhetorical points. Hey, you don't want to fund the military. But if they put it in there, it really would bring things to a head, don't you think?
That would be a good trick.
Well, the other thing is, I spent a little bit of time looking at the White House statement on this, the statement of the president when he vetoed it, and it really is fascinating. First of all, it's pretty sloppily done, in my opinion. But there is a massive contradiction, and someone else pointed this out too. But there is a massive contradiction in the statement, because here's what it says. On the one hand, this is a quote: "This joint resolution is unnecessary because the U.S. is not engaged in hostilities in or affecting Yemen." Then you go down a paragraph. "SJ Res 7 is dangerous. Congress should not seek to prohibit certain tactical operations or require military engagements to adhere to arbitrary timelines." So they're admitting it's a military engagement, but they're saying it's not a military engagement.
Right.
So, it's a war, but not a war. And I wonder, the U.S. said, oh, we're only refueling the Saudi planes, we're only giving them targeting advice and things like this. You can imagine if the Chinese were attacking us and the Russians were refueling their planes, giving them targeting advice, if the U.S. would think the Russians are not engaged in a war against the U.S.
Yeah, and in general, he says this hurts our ability to maintain our foreign policy. Yeah, like the people are trying to speak out and rein in powers that the president shouldn't have. And also, he goes back to the old trick. It's those Iranians. It's their coalition with the Houthis. And you know what they want to do? They want to take over that whole peninsula. And that's why Saudi Arabia is dealing with this. It's aggression against Saudi Arabia. And it also has to do with oil. There's no doubt in my mind that the oil is always a factor, and this idea that it's helpful, to Iran and Iran's behind it, it is a stretch, but he describes this. It's always a danger to America. It's a danger to our Constitution. It's a danger to our freedoms. That's why we go overseas. Why do we have to go so far to protect our rights when they have plenty of work to do right here in this country? If they want to protect our liberties and our Constitution, it could start right here. It could have been yesterday if they wanted to protect our Constitution and protect America.
Yeah, it's like some commenter said, these poor Yemenis who can't even get a meal are going to jump on their camels and goats and swim over and attack us. But you mentioned Iran, and it's all about Iran. There's no question about it. The real mission there, real U.S. mission there, is to counter Iranian influence in the region. But again, you have this cockamamie foreign policy, because all of our actions, ironically, by emboldening the Saudis, by backing up the Saudis, it's leaving the Yemenis, the Houthis, nowhere to turn but Iran. If we were actually playing a proper broker, if we had to have a role at all, and trying to end the war, then they would have somewhere to turn but Iran. So we're pushing them in the arms of Iran and then saying, hey, you guys are in the arms of Iran.
Another thing, looking at this vote, to pass the resolution, there were only 7 Republicans. I blame bipartisanship because when Obama was there, he sort of initiated all this. So that's one thing, but there's also some partisan disagreements too. But only 7 Republicans, voted for the resolution. But the other thing that, still is there, although you're not supposed to talk about this, there's many who profess pretty strong Christian values,
Yeah.
and yet it has nothing to do with peace.
Yeah.
That's a personal annoyance to me. That is not a political thing as much as, if people have a profession, or they profess certain things, but going to war means nothing in a way of conscience. Oh, but it's to protect our liberties. Then those are excuses.
Yeah.
Those aren't reasons, and to me that's discouraging. Matter of fact, some of the opposition to us actually use that to support their positions, and those particular groups come together and they're unified. There's the right wing frequently has the support of that. I knew that when I campaigned because
You got booed.
if I mentioned the golden rule, which I thought, well, I'm not getting too much into theology. The golden rule could apply to almost anybody, But the golden rule that was taboo.
Ooh.
So that's hypocrisy.
Absolutely. Going back to the president's statement, the White House's statement, there's so many other fallacies, and we could probably spend the show doing it. But one fallacy is, if this had passed, curtailing our efforts in the war, that's not a war, it will, quote, negatively affect our efforts to prevent civilian casualties. That is almost cruel, because look at what I think you mentioned, 80,000 civilian children starved, thousands and thousands of civilians, buses blown up, marketplaces blown up. How's that going? Not too well. If it's all about our protecting and preventing civilian casualties, it's awful. So if we really wanted to prevent civilian casualties, we just simply demand that the Saudis stop doing this. The war is over. You can't do it anymore.
And we've mentioned this before many times, is why do they keep doing the same thing? That is, pursue these types of wars, interference, especially in the Middle East in the last 20 years. And nothing works. Sometimes it does exactly the opposite. We go into Iraq and we build an ally for the Iranians. Then we say, oh, we have to fight war with the Iranians. And there's some warmongers right now are itching at the bit to go to war with Iran.
And the other fallacy in here, they say that it harms the ability to prevent the spread of terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda. That is an absolute fallacy. And we've talked about this so many times on the show, and there are many examples, but we've cited the August 6th AP investigation that found that U.S. and coalition forces, quote, made compromises with Al-Qaeda that have allowed Al-Qaeda militants to fight another day. And also Michael Horton is quoted in that piece, and he's a scholar at the Jamestown Foundation, which is a mainstream think tank. He said, quote, much of what the U.S. is doing in Yemen is aiding Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula. So the idea that we're fighting Al-Qaeda, no, that's not happening.
Well, I think that contradiction was also evident in Syria.
Yeah.
Sometimes, we're there to take care of Al-Qaeda, except if they help us get rid of Saddam or Assad.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we'll do that. So then we're their buddies and we help them out. No, I think that that is the problem. It's a foreign policy design not for the protection and the defense of the country and defending our liberties. It has to do with empire. It has to do with imperial presidency. It has essentially nothing to do with protecting personal liberty, because if you wanted to make a list, I imagine we have a few friends that could make a pretty strong, devastating, depressing list of what's happened in the last 19 years, just in this century. It's been devastating because we had to crack down on our enemies. But it turned out the American people have been more the enemies than anybody else. And we have suffered and cost a lot of money, but that's beside the point. We get to print it.
Yeah. And so you hit on this a little earlier. Probably will follow up on it a little bit. But the question of what to do, I sort of thought, and I think I tweeted something yesterday about this. maybe it's just a fantasy, but it seems to me that the Congress having spoken and being so rebuked by the president, you would think that that would cause more members and senators to rally to this cause, even if they don't necessarily believe that the war should end, by saying, "Oh yeah, you want to do this? Well, we're going to get together and we're going to try to override it." Who knows?
It's still a lot that drives this is this obsession and hatred toward Trump. So that mixes these votes up sometimes. And some of those Republicans that maybe voted the wrong way because they're sick and tired of the attacks on the president, the unfair attacks against the president. So it is a mixed bag, but that's the way the system works. And that's why I emphasize the fact that waking up the electorate does help, even though that's very frustrating, that eventually that's the only way it's going to stop. But quite frankly, I don't think it's coming real soon. It'll be interesting to see what happens to today and the next week and even toward the campaign, because Trump, I had considered to be the peace candidate in the last election.
Yeah.
He was much more peaceful oriented than Hillary.
Sure, yeah.
But now they're going to have somebody, the progressives are going to get away with becoming more peace oriented. And this could be a devastating blow to Trump.
Yeah,
politically speaking.
Yeah, politically speaking. Well, speaking of this, the Imperial Presidency and wars, I'm reminded that it was actually 6 years ago today, Dr. Paul, that we started the Ron Paul Institute. We had our press conference opening it. We were in the right across from the Capitol at the Capitol Hill Club. It was well attended, and we've done a lot of work these years. We've done 6 or 7 conferences, I guess we've had. Thousands of people have come to join us. We've published probably 10,000 articles and almost 1,200 of these programs. So we've done a lot in these years. I'm proud of what we've done. And I look forward to more years. And I would, we do rely on you for support, your tax-deductible donations. I hate to keep pounding this, but today of all days would be a great day to make a donation to the Ron Paul Institute to help us have another 6 years, or maybe another 60 years, because the cause of peace is a 24/7 job, and we all have to work together to do it. And as you know, in April, Dr. Paul's terrific book, The Individual versus the Collective, this is about war. This is about social policy. Everything in this little booklet will be yours. We'll send it to you for your donation, for your membership donation of $50. And if you want to up it a little and go 100 or more, Dr. Paul will sign it. 6th anniversary today. Dr. Paul, I'm so grateful to you for allowing us to get this ball rolling.
Well, I have to say you've done an excellent job, and I think the big difference with our organization and others when you look at the financing, I think we've accomplished a whole lot with less than a lot of other places. Sometimes when these organizations get so big and bureaucratic, they become like government, and there's a lot of ways. I'll tell you what, that doesn't happen with us. So we have to struggle to keep things going, and we will, because we're not going to give up on this. Because somebody said, "Don't you get tired of it?" I said, "No, I'd be very tired and frustrated if I had to just sit there and not say a word." So I'm delighted to realize that we have people like you tuning into our program. That's what is encouraging us to continue to do this. And as long as somebody's willing and interested in hearing about it, we're going to stay very active. I think there's no doubt in our minds, and it should be no doubt in any other person's minds, that the whole idea of non-intervention across the board, keep the government out of our personal lives, keep the government out of our economic decisions, and keep the government, our government, from interfering in the internal affairs of other nations. If you want a road to peace and prosperity, that is the road you should follow. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.